legends in music.
Traditional music is the richest treasure trove of the cultural heritage of our people. Music is sounded everywhere. It is cheerful, and it opens festivities, or it would congratulate the birth of a child. It is energetic and rhythmic, and it is the inspiration of Batirs for their victories. It is also sad and mournful, seeing off an old man on his last journey. Virtuosic and deeply emotional Kuishis were always famous for their poetic musical works, and their expressive melodies still amaze with their deep beauty. Kui can last only a few minutes, but they contain the century-old history of our people. A kui can be performed on various instruments: the kobus, sibizge, dumbra, or shertir. Performers learned their musical compositions by ear, passing them on to each other. The tradition of this art included also an oral narrative, the content of the kui and the occasion for which it was written. But over time, Kui legends lost their words, and now only music tells us about the amazing events of the past. So how do you know what a Dumbra is singing about? We will be able to tell you only one version of the narrative of this amazingly beautiful Kui. In a rich yurt with carved furniture and beautifully embroidered carpets, it was stuffy and hot from the hot hearth, and from the arguments of the men who gathered at the time, as usual, at B. Kazangapuly, famous for his sharp mind and reason. The men discussed the coming political changes, pressing domestic affairs, and endless tribal disputes. The canopy rose, and along with the rush of fresh, cold autumn air, a young Jigit burst into the yurt, rumpled from a quick ride on his fast, strong stallion. Bowing to everyone, he sat down on the edge and stared at his father with his eyes. But the father didn't pay any attention and continued his conversation. Finally, after drinking his fragrant tea, the guests began to slowly disperse. When the shutters of the wooden carved door slammed behind the last important and fat rich man, the Jigit rushed to his father. "Father, how much patience do you have to sit and listen to these endless complaints against each other? Your head can spin around. They remind me of the stubborn travelers who don't allow each other to pass from behind, although there is an empty field around. Ah, Tattimbet, it is always like this when one Bai has at least one more ram in a cattle, and the second bar's head hurts from more than one strong kumus. And my task and yours in the future is that all parties are satisfied and exactly follow our code of rules, Jiti Jargi." Kazangapuly smiled and stroked his chin. "Father, I've been waiting for you," the son exclaimed with fervor. "I wanted to share with you my thoughts and my feelings." Kazangap fixed his attentive and inquiring gaze at his beloved son, and suddenly something pinched him inside. "You wanted to arrange a marriage for me," continued Tattimbet, nervously pulling back and straightening his leather belt. "You told me that it's enough for me to have fun and to compete in itisses with the young girls." "That's right," the father answered, shaking his head. "You need to get serious very soon." "So that's it. I've decided. I've fallen in love with the most beautiful girl that I've ever seen in my entire life, and I want to marry her." Kazangap silently listened to his son, and he was afraid to hear the girl's name. He had long ago found a bride worthy of his son, and only waited for a chance to talk about it. "You're not interested in who she is?" "I'm waiting for you to tell me her beautiful name," said the Bai Kazangap, and he took a bowl of kummus. "Her name is Aksunkar, and I want her to be my wife." The father smiled tightly and began to drink slowly his kummus, pondering his answer. He was well aware of the wayward character of his Tattimbet. In his youth, he himself was like that. The bee hoped that his experience and wisdom would solve such a difficult issue in his favor. But it was necessary to arrange everything so that his son did not realize that he was categorically against his choice. This marriage was not possible. Tattimbet looked forward with impatience at his father's answer. His cheeks were burning either from a hot hearth or from excitement. Finally, his father finished his kummus and began to speak. "You are a worthy Jigit, and your choice is very good." The young man, hearing his father's approving words, exhaled with relief. She is young and beautiful, as well as intelligent. And if I were young as you, I would also have a passionate love for her," Kazangap continued to say. "Father, I knew that you would understand me," exclaimed Tattimbet joyfully. "But as far as I know," the bee said slowly, "Aksunkar already has a groom." Tattimbet turned pale from these words and said quietly, "Yes, I know, father, but she still will be mine. There are many ways to cancel a matchmaking." "Yes, my son, you can cancel the matchmaking. But you will judge like me, and you will always have this stain on you. And you can never defend your case, because people will always remind you of your misconduct. And your honor, if you want to become a worthy bee, is that you must always be pure and transparent as a mountain spring. There should not be any turbidity in it. It is necessary to respect the laws of the steppe. Then the people will believe you and listen to your words." The young man bowed his head and thought deeply. His father's bitter words were true. The next morning, the father sent his son to the city on urgent business for several days. Although there were no urgent cases at all, he equipped his trusted assistant with a letter to the groom of Aksunkar with a request to quickly marry the bride. Together with the messenger, he gave money for the wedding, but only with one condition, that all of this would remain a secret. Edigye, the groom of Aksunkar, was very surprised and pleased with this turn of events in his life. He did not even begin to wonder why he was so urged by the esteemed Bai, Kazangap. The next day he sent his matchmaker to the father of the girl. Tattimbet had to stay in the city for more than a week, until one day, accidentally, he did not meet his friend in the market. During the conversation, he heard the news about the upcoming wedding of Aksunkar and the Jigit Yedigye. Tattimbet's heart froze in his chest, and he, without saying a word, jumped on the stallion and, lifting up a cloud of dust, galloped towards his house. The bee Kazangap, just in case, sent all of his herds to a distant pasture. After all, if the son returned before the scheduled time, he would not be able to find in the village any stallion on which he could go to the neighboring village of Aksunkar. In the sticky foam, stumbling with fatigue, he brought his horse and its rider to the village. Tattimbet jumped off the horse and looked around. No one met him. Only a few servants greeted him with a bow. He threw his angry glance at them, and he was about to saddle another stallion, but the servants told him that there was not a single horse in all the far pasture. Tattimbet raged furiously. If he didn't have time to pick up his beloved one, then he will never see her again. There was not a single horse in the whole aul. Only one horse near a yurt, which was on the drifts. It was tweaking the grass. Tattimbet saddled his horse and, lashing his kamcha on either side, galloped at full speed. The young man galloped across the valley, choosing the shortest path, but even that was unbearable for the horse. Quickly exhausting its strength, it stumbled and fell to the ground. Quietly and imperceptibly, the night came, plunging the whole steppe into darkness. Tattimbet grabbed his head. His bitter tears flowed from his eyes. He fell on the dry, thorny grass next to the tired horse and covered his face with his hands. He couldn't feel the autumn's night cool, nor the painful dampness of the earth. His heart was bursting with despair and pain. He was lying on the ground, and only in the morning did he forget himself in a troubled dream. So Tattimbet did not have time to see his beloved, and she was taken away by her fiancé. The young man was having a hard time parting with Aksunkar. He grieved over it for a long time, but as the scorched steppe burnt down, once soon it was sprouting a new grass, and so the heart of the young Jigit will gradually reconcile with the loss. Many years have passed since then, and he became a worthy successor of his father's work. People flocked even from the most remote outskirts to get advice of the fairest bee, Tattimbet. Tattimbet led many affairs according to his honor and conscience. And once, returning from a long trip, he saw on the edge of the road a walking stooped woman carrying a heavy bag. He galloped past and fortunately did not recognize her in her former beauty, that it was Aksunkar, who had a hard life with an unloved person, who stole all of her youth and beauty. All folk performers, akuns, jirshis, dombrists all possess a delicate perception of the world and a unique memory, thanks to which many works have been preserved in musical history. Now it is difficult to establish which musical instruments originated earlier and which later, although according to many researchers the firsts were percussive instruments, and later there were wind and strings. Currently, more than 50 types of Kazakh musical instruments are known. Each has its own sound and traditional methods of performance. The imported materials were not used in making instruments. Everything was provided by nature and the economy of the nomadic life. They were made of clay, cane, wood, horns, bones and hooves of animals, as well as feathers of birds. Skin and horsehair and veins of animals were used to make membranes, bows, and strings. Since ancient times, the forged skill developed by nomads made it possible to make instruments, and their separate parts from metal, often from silver. The technology of making instruments and the technique of playing on them are aimed at creating a sound that is as much possibly saturated with overtones that give the sound volume and colorfulness. Thanks to folk craftsmen, the traditions of making national instruments have been preserved to this day. People were proud of the great musicians and were happy if their child was drawn to the dombra. It was a real happiness to welcome a musician, and the greatest pride was that if he, touched by a warm welcome, dedicated his kui to the masters of the house. Traditional culture is characterized by the absence of rigid instrumental standards. They delight the eye with a variety of shapes and sizes. The musician should not adapt to the instrument, because each instrument is made by the master for a particular performer, based on the individual features of his physique, the functions of the instrument, and his repertoire. Thus, traditional instruments sound great in the hands of musicians. The Kazakh people are creators of wonderful music, colorful, rich, and original. Tattimbet entered the history of the Kazakh music as an outstanding classic of the Sherpe style. The peak of the composer's creativity is the kui, called Sacred, created in the last years of his life. In it, he wanted to convey his spiritual and life path. In addition to the capacious, informative part, this kui is a complex work, requiring a special performing art of playing the dumbra. His kuis contained all the richness and diversity of musical folk culture.